As Kelly mentioned, I didn't start out in tech. It seemed I changed my career about every 10 years or so. I started out in chemistry and then art conservation and heritage preservation. In 2015, I started looking into blockchain for track and trace of intellectual property. For at the time, content creator, of course, but as you all know, in a digital world that we are living in, we are all content creators. What we search on the internet, what we buy, and of course, our movements are all monetizable by those that collect the data. At the moment, all that movements data is controlled by centralized platform. It can be private, such as Google or Waze, or public, like smart city initiatives, who are all creating centralized databases. There has to be a more democratic and decentralized way of controlling and monetizing our own movement data. And this is one of the reasons why MOBI was started. Speaking of movement, people and goods are on the move faster and farther than ever before. We all have ordered online and want things to be delivered immediately. All that movement comes as a cost, not just the sticker price of a new car or a train ticket or shipping bill, but also environmental costs. Transport, in fact, eats up a significant portion of our global carbon budget. Transport emissions, which primarily involve road, rail, air, and marine transport, account for almost a third of global emissions. And is expected to grow faster than any other sector, posing a major challenge for efforts of emission reduction in line with the Paris Agreement and other global goals. Road transportation is the greatest oil demanding sector in the OECD. In 2019, more than 35% of oil consumed was related to transportation. By comparison, the petrochemical sector, which produces plastic, resin, and other petroleum-based products, account for less than 14%. The US and China are the greatest oil consumers worldwide. In 2020, the US consumed 17.2 million barrels a day, and China about 14.2 million barrels a day. To meet the Paris Agreement goals, we need to cut carbon dioxide emissions between 1 to 2 gigatons per year. Another way to look at it is the greenhouse gas reduction needs to be 30 to 40% by 2030, 60 to 80% by 2050, and likely close to 100% after that. According to the 2020 global carbon budget released in December of last year, the economic effects of COVID-19 caused fossil fuel emissions to decrease by 7%. And much of that was contributed by transportation. As you can see from the graph on the right here, the peak drop was in April of last year. However, since then, it has moved all back up. Despite decades of progress on alternative low carbon fuels and technologies, most developed countries remain locked in to privately owned ICE vehicles. As you can see in the yellow-orange line here, transport emissions are expected to grow even if all the announced low carbon policies are implemented. So we need to do much more than we're doing. Emissions from aviation and shipping are growing more quickly and will require additional mitigation policy. Electric vehicles have attracted widespread interest because of their ability to reduce energy consumption and emissions. Due to these reasons, governments and car makers continue to make new commitment for EV production. To date, more than 20 countries have announced the full phase out of ICE vehicle sales over the next 10 to 30 years, depending on the country. Many major vehicle manufacturers have announced ambitious EV goals. Earlier this year at CES, GM made waves with its announcement to stop producing gas-powered car by 2035 and be carbon neutral by 2040. And since then, we have seen many auto car makers announce similar goals. As the cost of manufacturing EVs continue to fall, making them more competitive with ICE vehicles, technological advances in lithium-ion battery is the key to the growing success of EVs. Continued transition from electric will require a far greater battery production than we currently see today. Automakers have varied goals from shifting from ICE toward plug-in hybrids and EVs, and then EVs exclusively. The China market is the largest with 20 million registered vehicles. US has about 14 million, and Europe combined has 12 million. China and Europe wants EVs sooner than the US based on current policy, and no automakers can ignore them. The go electric date may continue to compress even further. Recently, we have all seen many news stories that EVs are, in fact, cleaner than ICE vehicles over their lifetime. But what does that really mean? Will they help us meet the Paris Agreement goals if we have mass adoption? Currently, EV sales are only about 3% of total vehicle sales worldwide. We would need to sell a lot more EVs if we want to meet the Paris Agreement goals. And many vehicles manufacturers have pledged to be carbon neutral by 2030, 35, and 40. And how will that happen? At the moment, it seems EVs are the answer. A new study published in the Journal of Nature Sustainability has concluded that EVs have lower carbon emissions overall, even if they are being charged with electricity generated by fossil fuels. So EV typically have lower emissions in the use space compared to similar ICE vehicles. However, as it turned out, not all EVs are created equal. EV life cycle assessment, or LSA, has been studied extensively. Many of the studies made it clear that the largest share of carbon emissions in the battery production process come from the electricity used during manufacturing. Therefore, using cleaner electricity in factories can significantly reduce emissions. The type of battery chemistry also makes a difference, as some chemistry has higher concentration of energy-intensive metals. Batteries recycling and end-of-life emissions impacts are most often not included in the LSA calculations, since there is significant uncertainty about how recycled materials would affect the carbon footprint. So the figure on the left here compares an average new European ICE passenger vehicle. That's the first column on the left. The second column is the most efficient ICE vehicle available at the time of the study. This was back in 2017. And the on the right side is the most efficient EV available at the time, charged using average grid mixes in different countries. The comparison is from 5 countries, representing more than 3/4 of EV sales in 2017. The comparison adds up the carbon dioxide emissions from manufacturing of the lithium battery, the other components to make up the vehicle, along with emissions from fuel and electricity use and the tailpipe emissions. And as you can see, EVs generally are better, but not always better compared to ICE vehicles. The study also compared plug-in hybrid, which depends on location, can be greener than EVs. EV manufacturing requires more energy and produces more emissions than manufacturing ICE vehicles because of the battery. Lithium-ion battery production requires extracting and refining of rare earth materials of metals that require energy intensive because of the sterile condition and the high heat that it offset with that. Most lithium-ion batteries in electric vehicles in Europe at the time of the study, at the time that was 2017, I think it's still the same today. The batteries typically produced in Japan and South Korea, where approximately at the time 25% to 40% of electricity generation is from coal. As EVs continue to become more affordable and their sales continue to grow, it will increasingly become important to understand the life cycle environmental impacts of the technology. There are a number of policy and trends point toward reducing emissions from battery production. And let's take a look at some of them here. The first one is grid decarbonization. A cleaner grid, both where the EVs are produced and charged later on during its lifetime, will be the largest single driver of EV life cycle emissions reduction in the future. Second life, when batteries are removed from EVs after their first life, they're likely to retain significant capacity, typically 75 to 80% of their original capacity. A report from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory identifies supporting the grid at peak times as the most promising opportunity for EV second life, EV battery second life. Naturally, there is great uncertainty regarding the performance and the capacity of the second life. A number of utilities and governments already piloting such programs for both economic and environmental reasons. Recycling is currently undeveloped, and that's understandable. But however, as EV industry grows, recycling will become more feasible. Recycled materials typically have a lower carbon footprint than the same material from virgin sources. For example, production of recycled aluminum creates about 95% less greenhouse gas emissions compared to production of aluminum from natural sources. However, other recycling processes can use substantially more energy. Therefore, depending on what is being recycled and the location it's being recycled in, it will affect the total saving on emissions. But as you can see, all these policies require consensus mechanism and immutability in track and trace, which we currently don't have. What we have are thousands of existing standards that were not developed cohesively, which is not too surprising. There are different type of policies and different options within each type of policy. There's the bottom-up approach of accounting, which counts each stage of each component during production. And then there's the top-down analysis, which determines the total emissions from a plant, then assign the emissions to different processes. This way can double count certain processes and emissions. In this context, the top-down inventories typically find higher emissions, often by a factor of 2 or more, and that's a lot. Inconsistent result can happen, not just from bad data, but also from good data using the wrong standards. And currently, this process is manual with on-site visits, resulting in huge inefficiency. And the final reports may not be credible or trusted, and therefore not useful. Current tracking system also tend to be created in silo, therefore difficult to migrate or integrate. These reasons have been the major impediment to countries fulfilling their climate pledges. The transition to low emissions and carbon neutral vehicles to offset transportation carbon budget will require digital solutions. Reports by the UN, World Bank, EU Commission, and World Economic Forum highlight the use of blockchain for digital MRV. Blockchain consensus mechanism and immutability are required for track and trace from materials, supply chain, through production, first life, second life, and recycling. Especially when paired with other emerging technologies such as AI and IoT, it can significantly enhance MRV driving trust for climate funded. The rise and adoption of blockchain application will enable us to design financial incentives. For example, the Green World Campaign and Cornell University are building smart contracts that use satellite data to automatically reward people who successfully regenerate tracts of land by increasing tree coverage, for example. So what is MOBI doing to help with digitizing MRV? I don't think I need to talk too much about MOBI. I think you all know about MOBI. We are a consortium of industry members coming together to create blockchain-based standards to identify vehicles, people, businesses, and MOBI Trusted Trip, with the goal of making transportation more efficient, democratic, affordable, greener, safer, and less congested. And MOBI itself is technology and vendor agnostic. So what is MOBI Trusted Trip? A trip is a roaming entity's journey from one place to another. The roaming entity can be a person, a smartphone, a vehicle, a package, a car battery, or even a set of data. A trip is just the basic unit of information for monetizing mobility in a service economy. For a trip to be useful, it must be trusted by all parties in the transaction. The components of the trusted trip are decentralized identity, sovereign identity, and ubiity, which is unique position in space and time, being certified through time as the entity move. MOBI defines a trusted trip as a trip whose attributes are validated by authorized entities or devices in the co-op decentralized network. So for MOBI and its members, the key primitive is the trusted trip. It enables marginal cost pricing and incentives for usage-based economy. It ensures that the data can be trusted or tamper evident when using decentralized network. The question is, how can third parties verify that a roaming entity started or complete a trip? So verification requirements include decentralized identities, physical presence, physical movement or lack of movement is also important. For example, if a windmill was installed in California and you find it in Montana, there probably is some cybersecurity issues there. And last but not least is the documentation of the trip. Why is decentralized identity important? As our lives are increasingly linked to apps, devices, services, we are often subject to our data being compromised and our privacy loss. A standard-based decentralized identity system could provide greater security, privacy, and control over our personal and organizational data. MOBI Trusted Trip is the key primitive for smart mobility by using a minimum set of industry accepted proofs. All MOBI working groups involve industry experts in their subject matter. The ecosystem will enable scaling, incentivizing, and monetization for a multitude of new and existing use cases in smart and low carbon mobility. The trusted trip can be used to determine, for example, proof of emissions. We call it the Trusted Carbon Emissions Tracking, TCET. A proof of charging and payment, for example, a proof of custody, ownership, and countless of many other smart mobility use cases. This also is a key primitive for parts traceability up and down the supply chain by also, again, using a minimum set of industry accepted proofs. This will enable a set of use cases such as recalls, authenticity, labor practices, and also TCET for material production and supply chain. As we move towards a low carbon economy, we will need to adopt digital solutions such as blockchain. For transportation, from reporting emission estimate to real measurement, blockchain is an excellent auditable system of record that can track emissions data from provenance, provide data security, prevent the double counting problem, and introduce transparency to prove performance and prevent fraudulent claims. In addition, by leveraging smart contracts, you can automate and incentivize sustainable practices with coordination between individual governments and companies. The stakeholders, investors, and the public are looking for accountability and will increase pressure on companies to disclose real measurements instead of estimate, while ensuring trust and auditability in reports of carbon emission, and of course, to provide the associate proof with it. MOBI is working with our members on the Trusted Trip standard, which we will be released soon in a month or so. Currently, the use cases being demonstrated by the MOBI community using the Trusted Trip are supply chain parts traceability for EV batteries, vehicles maintenance such as battery state of health, trusted carbon emissions tracking for verifying emissions claim, usage-based fees such as tolling, road usage charge, insurance, and electric charging and sharing, curbside management, incentives and rewards for sustainable behavior, dealer floor plan audit to reduce the cost of vehicle ownership. And the future use cases being considered also include verification of green energy sources and verification of chain of custody. These use cases are being demoed in our Drives program. The program was launched earlier this year to implement our standards and test the use cases that the community have come up with. And this is an important program for us. Many of our members have done POC as early back in 2016 and 17. And at the time, these proved that the technology worked, and there were a lot of excitement and press releases go out, but they didn't scale. And looking back, the problem was easy. It's not the fact that it's the technology, is the fact that we need to get together as a community to sit down and create standards that we all can accept and implement it to be able to create products and services that can communicate with each other. And so this is also one of the other main reasons why MOBI was launched in 2018. We spent the first 2.5 years creating standards, and this time we built the infrastructure, which is the plumbing for the ecosystem. And here is the high-level overview of our infrastructure. I apologize for the busy slide, but I'll walk over it on a high level. We're calling the technology as MOBI Technology Stack, MTS. Since late 2018, we have launched 7 working groups and created 7 set of standards. and they are on the left column here that you see on the screen. We have vehicle ID 1 and 2, EV, electric vehicle grid integration. We have connected mobility data marketplace. We have usage-based mobility and insurance. We have supply chain, and we have finance, securitization, and smart contracts. In the last year or so, we have moved toward building the infrastructure, which are MOBINet and Setopia. And MOBINet is a core services infrastructure providing identity assurance and governance. And Setopia is an open and decentralized platform sitting on top of that to provide seamless movement. At the top is our Drives program to demo use cases using MOBI standards and MOBI Trusted Trip standard created by our community. The key thing regarding MOBI Trusted Trip that I would like you to take away is that it utilizes sovereign identity linked with the entity's location and time. And what that means is that these entities have the ability on their own terms to share location and time with another entity without disclosing identity-related information. The Trusted Trip is used in the verification of many decentralized mobility use cases, and we believe that it is the key primitive for the new economy of movement, where an entity's privacy is preserved at all times, and new business opportunities in mobility are unlocked. At this time, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I will open up for questions if you have them.
All right, thank you so much, Tram. We have our first question. Does Trusted Trip account for the solution, drives, etc., the carbon component, or have a view to be carbon neutral or negative?
I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly. Let me answer it. And if it's not answering your question, let me know. The Trusted Trip is essentially a standard and it's being implemented in the Drives program. So the Drives program has use cases that are nominated by our community. And to implement it, we relied on the Trusted Trip standard, which has data schema and asks you where is the data coming from and who has access to it and who has the rights to it. So that's how it's related to Drives. And the carbon component is not carbon neutral or negative. It's a tool. Think of the Trusted Trip as a standard being used as a tool to track and trace the carbon emission. And that's it.
Okay, thanks.
Did that answer the question?
I think so. But yeah, Paul, who asked the question, if not, feel free to chime in. Any other questions? Feel free to just put them in the chat box here. We have a question. Which framework did MOBI use for SSI in the current Drive program?
SSI, is that the sovereign identity? Self-sovereign identity you're talking about? Yes. So we use the W3C standard for decentralized identifiers.
Okay, great. And another question, when will the first usable product come out?
Right now we're demoing, and we're hoping that once the ecosystem get excited and more sustainable, MOBI will be focusing on building the infrastructure, which is MOBINet and Setopia, and the use cases or the dApps that is connected to these infrastructure will be driving by our members and our community. So that would be something that our community are building on. And we have a colloquium in June of next year, and the whole colloquium will be focusing on highlighting these use cases. So hopefully, at least by then, we have at least a couple.
Right. Any other questions? What are the key obstacles to success?
I think the mass adoption, of course. We are working. So we see the future for MOBI as the three-legged stool. The first leg is the members of MOBI and mobility. The second leg would be the telecoms communication to help us carry the messages for the connected mobility. And we are working extensively with telecoms. In fact, we are working with MEF, which is MEF Forum, to build MobiNet right now. And then the third leg of the three-legged stool is the infrastructure owner and operator. So we are extensively working with governments and things like toll road provider and tolling providers to be able to bridge all three legs of the three-legged stool. So hopefully the mass adoption will become bigger.
The next question is, will there be more details about certified ubiety in the soon to be published standard?
Yes, so the standards will come out, but do keep in mind that the standard is an overview of what should go in and out data-wise. But when it comes to each use case, we would need to have the industry experts sit down and say what kind of proofs are needed and where is the data coming from. So every use case will be different, and every use case need to be sit down and thought through before we do any certification.
Great. Is this a permissioned or permissionless blockchain solution? Does it depend on an underlying blockchain such as Ether?
My hope is eventually we'll be in a permissionless blockchain world, but we're not there yet. The technology is not there yet. So to start it out with, it is a permission ecosystem, and we have been a technology agnostic from the beginning. If you look at our website, we have all the major protocols on our website. So we're not building it on one particular chain. What we're trying to do is building the bridge to connect the two islands so that they can communicate together.
And what were the most critical approaches to successfully developing so many standards? What worked and what didn't work?
So from the beginning, MOBI, we truly believe that our members are busy. They all have full-time jobs of their own. MOBI, unlike other consortia, which usually have one or two employees, and then the rest of the time, they depend on their members to come and do the work. MOBI, each of the working group, we have a working group lead, then we have a technical lead, and then we have a fellow who does a lot of the research also. So each working group has at least 3 MOBI staff working on it to keep pushing forward. And then we have 2 chairs from the industry, and the working group, we select a lot of the members who have expertise in that subject matter to make up the working group. So together, I think MOBI and our members have done a lot, and we are very proud of the work we've done so far.
And is this all open source? Is it all on GitHub?
We need MOBI members, and we do need members to be able to do everything that we do. Unfortunately, we can't open source everything yet. I do hope that MOBI will become more sustainable in the near future so that all the standards can be open. Because as we all know, standards are as successful as the amount or as many people that adopt it. So we want as many people to adopt it as possible. But at this time, we cannot do that yet. We need members to do what we do. And all our schemas are on GitHub for our members to use.
Great. Thanks so much for your questions, everyone. Does anyone have any other questions for Tram? Someone said we are residing in Asia and focus on the APAC market. How can we participate in the Drives program?
We would love for you to come and participate in the Drive programs. We have a policy that all our programs has to be participated by MOBI members. So please come to our website and fill out the membership inquiry form, and we would love to talk with you.
All right. Any other questions, comments for Tram? Okay, there. Are there any real world use cases that we can look at?
Yes, for example, I haven't talked about all the use cases that we worked on, but we talk a lot with cities. And as you know, cities, congestion is getting worse and worse as cities' populations are on the rise. And due to that reason, right now, curbside management is the sexiest thing for city managers. So we talk with them about parking management, for example. In New York City alone in 2018, they gave out $50 million in parking tickets to the top two delivery companies in that's FedEx and UPS, and the cities, for them to be able to give the ticket requires a lot of resources, people going around giving the ticket, the database for registering all those tickets, and then also making sure that they get collected, and all that process requires a lot of money, and at the end they don't collect that much. And then companies don't like getting these tickets, of course, because it's time consuming, and at the end of the day they are not tax deductible, and because you're doing something illegal. So we've been trying to talk with cities and delivery companies like Amazon, who's a member, UPS and FedEx, to see if we can do a decentralized parking reservation with the city and automatically calculated how much the company owed the cities in parking per week, per day, or per month, depending on what they want to do. And that would be the ideal way, so that the cities at the end of the day want the delivery companies, want the people to do their job and not circling the block 10 times and do a lot of cause in congestion and then having to park illegally. So that would be one use case that we are talking with cities and delivery companies that we think would be very useful for city.
Great. Another question is, if someone deploys without MOBI, how would they do that? I.e., what is the competitive solution set?
I'm not sure if I understand the question, but let me see if I can answer it. At the end goal, we would like MobiNet and Zootopia to be able to be used by all. For example, think of it like a co-op. The co-op is owned and operated by the members, and they charge a service fee, for example, but anybody can be able to come in and use the co-op. So you can do it without MOBI, but if you come in, you get a say in how it's being done and get to be in it from the bottom, from the ground up.
Great. Any other questions for Tram, comments? Okay, I think that's all then. Thank you all so much for joining today. We really appreciate it. And we have a lot of other upcoming innovation lectures. And if you want to be first to know about Trusted Trip standards and all things MOBI, be sure to register or subscribe to our bulletin at dlt.mobi/bulletin. And then also you can check out all of our past lectures and upcoming lectures on our website as well. So thank you so much. And thank you, Tram, for today's lecture.